Hello everyone, my name's Kevin. I'm the developer of Impact CFX, and in this video I'm going to be walking you through how to set up Impact CFX in your project, and I'm also going to be walking through setting up some basic collision effects. So let's go ahead and get started. This project I already have set up here is a pretty simple project. It's based on the demo that is included with Impact CFX, just simplified for this tutorial. I already have Impact CFX imported into the project. There isn't any special installation that you need to do, but there are a few packages that are required, which we can find in the package manager. And these are the burst package, the collections package, and the mathematics package. Unity will have most of these imported already in most new projects, but it's just a good idea to go into your package manager and make sure you have all these installed before you import Impact CFX. So let's close that now. And let's go ahead and play my scene. So I've got a character controller that I can walk around. And I also have the ability to pick up with and interact with objects like this bottle here. And what I'm wanting to do is add some collision sound effect to this bottle so that as we're picking it up and tossing it around, it feels a bit more satisfying with those collision sound effects as it collides with the world. So let's go ahead and exit play mode now. And I already have some sound effects imported for that. So if I go into my demo assets here and into sounds, into the bottle sounds, I have some impact sounds for hard surfaces, the various collision intensities, and the same for soft surfaces. I have a roll sound effect, and I have some sliding sound effects. Alright, so now we can go ahead and start setting up Impact here. The first thing I'm going to do is actually optional if I go into the Impact CFX folder and to gizmos. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. These are just some icons for the various components and assets that come with Impact CFX. It can make these components and assets a bit easier to identify and just make them look a little bit nicer too. So to install these icons, all we have to do is take this gizmos folder and drag it into the root of our assets folder. And if you already have a gizmos folder here, you'll just need to take this Impact CFX subfolder and drag it into the existing gizmos folder. Again, this is completely optional, and you can completely ignore these icons if you want to. So next, we are going to go into our project settings, up to Edit and Project Settings. And we're going to go to this Impact CFX section, which was added when we imported the Impact CFX package. And this project settings section contains all the tags that Impact CFX is going to use when figuring out what effects to play based on what objects and what materials are colliding with each other. You can kind of think of tags as being similar to Unity's layers. They are a way that you can group objects and materials together based on things like the material type, different material attributes that different materials may have in common with each other. You can also use tags for events like bullet impacts or footsteps. It's a very versatile generic system, and as we are walking through setting up some effects, it should become a bit more clear about how you might be able to use these in your project. But in my case, if I go back to my sound effects here for my bottle, I already have sound effects for two different types of materials. I have the hard impact sound effects and I have the soft impact sound effects. So I'm going to use that as kind of the basis for my tags, and I'm just going to create hard and soft tags. And there we go. That's all we need to do with our project settings, so we can close out of that now. And next, I'm going to be making an Impact CFX Manager object in my scene. The Impact CFX Manager is responsible for handling all the processing that goes into processing collision events and turning them into collision effects. And so the easiest way to add one of these to our scene is if we right click in our hierarchy, we can go down to Impact CFX and click on Create Impact CFX Manager. And since this is a first time setup, I got this pop-up here that tells me that no impact material registries exist in my project. I'm going to go over what an impact material registry is a little bit later, so I'm just going to click yes to go ahead and create one. And I'm just going to rename that a little bit and just put it in the root of my assets folder. So now we can see that there is an Impact CFX Manager object here now. And it's got a bunch of different sub-objects here. All of these are responsible for processing the different kinds of effects. You can see we have processors for each of the 3 audio, particle, and decal effects. And we also have some processors for the different kind of objects that we may have in our scene. And of course the main Impact CFX Manager here itself. I'm not going to be going through all these properties here in this tutorial. If you want to learn more about these, you can check out the Impact CFX documentation. So now that we have that set up, we can go ahead and start creating some Impact CFX assets. So the first one I'm going to create is an audio effect asset. And to do that, I'm going to click on Assets, right click that, and Create. Go up to Impact CFX, and I'm going to select an audio effect. Now this first audio effect, I'm going to make it for my hard sounds that I have, my sounds for colliding with hard surfaces. So I'm going to call this one Bottle Audio Hard. And now starting at the top here, we have a list of collision audio clips. And these are one-shot audio clips that will be used for the kind of single event collisions that happen as the object is colliding with things in the scene. So I'm going to go into my sound effects here, and I'm going to lock the inspector just to make this a little easier to drag and drop. And I'm going to select all of these one-shot impact effects here and just drag them into the collision audio clips list. Now the collision audio clip selection mode is set to velocity, which is actually what I want because my audio clips have been sorted based on the collision intensity, starting with the least intense collision or the collision with the lowest velocity at 0, and going all the way up to the last one, which is the collision with the highest velocity, which is how this velocity selection mode works. We can also set the selection mode to random, which will just choose an audio clip randomly from the list, but I'm going to keep it at velocity. Now for our slide audio clip, we can just go back into our sound effects here and drag and drop that one. And the same thing for the roll audio clip. And now our audio source template. This is a prefab that has an audio source on it that the Impact CFX will make instances of to actually play the sounds in game. So we need to assign a prefab with an Impact audio source component on it. And I already have a prefab set up. If I go into my prefabs and audio, I have an audio source template. And all this is a game object with an audio source component on it. But we need to add an impact audio source to be able to use it in our audio effect. So we can go to Add Component, Impact CFX, into Audio, and then click on Impact Audio Source. You can see the audio source field here was already assigned, and there are also some other properties here. Again, I'm not going to go into detail for all these. You can check out the Impact CFX documentation if you want to learn more about those. So now we can head back into our audio effect and just drag and drop our audio source template into this field. And now the rest of these I'm going to leave as the defaults. And now I'm done with the hard audio effect. So now I'm going to do the same thing for soft. And I'm actually just going to duplicate my asset. To make things go a little bit quicker, I'm going to clear out all these values here and replace them with the soft variants. And you can see I don't have a roll audio clip, but that's totally fine. You can leave any of these audio clip fields blank, and that just means that no audio effect will be played for a collision of that specific type. And so now we are done with our audio effect assets. So now we are going to create an impact material asset, and an impact material asset just holds all of the effects that would be played for a given material. So let's go ahead and go back to Assets and right-click that and Create, up to Impact CFX, and we're going to create a material this time. And since this was for my bottle, I'm just going to call it Bottle. So now starting at the top again, we have the Material Tags field. These are the tags that other materials are going to look at when determining what effects that they are going to play when colliding with an object that has this material on it. So the tags are basically the main way that impact materials communicate with each other and figure out what effects they should be playing. So for bottle, I would consider that a hard material. So I'm just going to select hard, and you can select as many of these as you want. You don't have to select just one, but I'm going to leave it as hard for now. And the effect sets, these are groups of effects that will be played whenever this material is colliding with another object that has a given set of material tags. So let's go ahead and add an effect set to this list. And this first effect set is going to be for all of my hard surface effects. So I'm just going to call this effect set hard. And for the include tags, I want this effect to be played whenever we collide with something that is hard. So for the include tags, I'm going to set it to hard, which just means that the object we're colliding with has to include the hard tag in order for these effects to be played. And the exclude tags is basically the opposite of that. If the object we're colliding with has any of the tags defined in the exclude tags, that just means this effect set is going to be ignored, but I'm going to leave that as nothing. And now we can finally drag and drop our audio effect that we created earlier into the effects list. And that's that effect set all set up. And again, we just do the same thing for our soft audio effects. Just update everything here and replace this with our soft audio effect. Now the last property here is the fallback tags property. And this is basically just the default tags that the material will use if it doesn't really know what it's colliding with. So these are just the default tags that it'll fall back to. And I'm going to set that as hard, so it'll just use the hard effect set here as its default. And now we can go ahead and start setting up the bottle object itself. And there are a few components that we need to add to get this set up for Impact CFX. The first one we're going to add is an impact object component. So let's go to Add Component here, Impact CFX, down to Objects. And since this object has a rigid body on it, I'm going to add the impact object rigid body component. And the impact object rigid body component allows me to select a material. So I'm just going to select my bottle material. And by itself, this component isn't actually going to do anything because we need to add some more components that will actually trigger the collision events, which will in turn trigger the collision effects. So if we go to Add Component again, and click on Impact CFX, and we're going to go to 3D triggers since we are using 3D physics. And the first trigger we're going to add is the impact collision trigger. And this collision trigger is for one-shot kind of collision triggers using those one-shot collision effects we assigned to our audio effect earlier. And there's a lot of advanced options here that you can play around with to get this working exactly how you want, but I'm going to leave these as their defaults for right now. And lastly, we had some sliding and rolling sound effects that we want to play. So there is a separate trigger for that. Going back to Add Component, And back into our 3D triggers, we're going to add the slide and roll trigger. And everything is already set up for us. And now one last thing that we need to do is we need to actually take a look at that impact material registry that we created when we made our impact CFX manager. You can see there's a material registry field here that points to this asset. And this impact material registry asset is a list of all the materials that will be registered with the impact CFX system. The materials have to be in this list, otherwise effects won't play for them, and objects that are colliding with each other, if their materials aren't in this list, they won't really know what they're colliding with. So it's very important to keep this materials list up to date with all the impact materials in your project. So you can manually drag and drop materials into this list, or you can click the Scan for Impact Materials button, and that'll just look through your project and add all of the impact material assets that it finds. So now with that, we should be good to go to test this out. So let's go ahead and pick up our bottle. And there we go, we're hearing some collision sound effects. And let's try out our rolling effect here. You can kind of hear it a little bit, and the sliding as well. So all that seems to be working good for us. Now one problem we're going to find here is, so if we drop our bottle on this concrete texture here, it makes a hard impact like we would expect. But if we go to the grass here, it's still making that hard impact sound effect. And I think it will make a lot more sense for the grass to make a soft impact sound effect. And the reason it's not is because we never set up our terrain here to have an impact object component on it, so that the impact CFX system knows what materials to use for the different textures on the terrain. But luckily, it is pretty easy to set that up here. So let's go out of play mode and select our terrain. And we're going to go to Add Component, back to our objects in Impact CFX. And there's a special impact terrain component that is specifically for terrain objects. So let's go ahead and add that. And what this component allows us to do is assign impact materials for all the different terrain layers of our terrain. So I just have 2 here for the grass and the concrete. But right now, I only have the bottle material. So I'm actually going to want to set up some specific materials for the grass and concrete. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Let's go create our material asset. And I'm going to do grass first. And all I have to do for grass is set the material tags to be soft. I don't need to add any effect sets or anything like that. And I can do the same thing for concrete. This time, setting the material tags to hard. And now I can go back into my terrain here and assign the materials appropriately. And there's also a field here for default material, which will be used if a given terrain layer doesn't have a specific material assigned to it. So I can just drag in grass as a default material. And one last thing we need to make sure we do before we play the scene is go back into our impact material registry and update it to include these 2 new materials. Otherwise, the system won't know what we're colliding with when it's colliding with the terrain because the materials weren't registered. So now we can go back and play the scene again. And let's try dropping our bottle here now. Good, that's still working. And over to our grass. Here now it plays the soft audio collisions instead of the hard ones. All right, So now we've got Impact CFX set up in our project, and this workflow we've gone through is basically the same for all the effects that are a part of Impact, the particle and decal effects, as well as the extensions such as the Fmod and Wise integrations. Setting up your effect assets and any prefabs that might be needed for that effect, setting them up with the appropriate components. Then assigning those effects to materials, and then finally setting up the needed components on your objects. So I hope this tutorial was helpful for you, and take care.